Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites throughout the communities of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. Today's episode will be discussing the South Cemetery located in Belchertown, Mass. So tell us about some of the details of the South Cemetery.
This cemetery is the oldest cemetery in Belchertown, so all the pioneers of Belchertown would use it, and a lot of them are buried here. So today we're going to talk about the cemetery nowadays also, and some of the gravestones interesting for the people or for the design on them, and whether the gravestones are in the correct way for an old Protestant cemetery. Now, it was also at one point called the Old Belchertown Cemetery for obvious reasons. It was the first one along, and it wasn't until many more came around that they renamed it South Cemetery because it's towards the south of Belchertown. The location of it is on Mill Valley Road, which is called Highway 181. Okay, and it has a third name called the Lone Oak Cemetery. Probably it had an oak tree that lasted a long time there, and they named it after that. But nowadays, it's named by the geographical location of it. So if you go through it, it's very obvious how it's set out. The old is towards the right, extreme right, with some table gravestones, for instance, in there. To the left and along the main roadway through it, you have some of the middle-aged ones, those from the late 1800s, very early 1900. And then towards the back, you have the modern section. And it's still an active cemetery. And one peculiar thing that you might be interested in is about the first maybe 12 to 15 burials coming out of the Belchertown State School, which was made in 1922. And for the first 3 years, they used the South Cemetery as the institutional burial ground. And then they made their own, the Pine Grove Cemetery. And there's a lot of other little details you should check out. Its webpage I built for it, for pictures and more textual information.
And what type of work needs to be done in this cemetery?
Very obviously, some of the stones need to be repaired. Many of them are broken or fallen down on the ground. I don't think Belchertown's a Community Preservation Act yet. And the layout is pretty nice. So I wouldn't change that, and changing that would upset the balance of where they're supposed to be pointed. Now, you could also improve the grass. A lot of it's quite dead. And the wall itself is nice, but if you fix it in all directions, then that'd be great too. There's one tablet, inscription panel gravestone, which naturally is going to be on the ground, and that one is cracked. And those are gorgeous. So if they ever fix that one up, it'll improve the cemetery quite greatly.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltours.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, are the gravestones in the cemetery oriented correctly?
In the old days, the Protestant cemeteries had the inscription tablet of all burials pointed into a westerly direction, and the footstone would point towards east. The body be oriented so that the head of the deceased was near the headstone, and the feet and legs of the deceased were near the footstones. They should have both, and thus if you walk around the outside of a burial plot, you'd see inscriptions always point outwards. Now, if you go in this cemetery, there's hardly any footstones around. There are a few, especially when they're reeled off or stoned off for a family plot. Then you end up getting some footstones being saved. Now, in general, the headstones do point towards the west for the period from the birth of the cemetery, which was 1743. For about 100 years, they should be pointing towards the west. And most of those very old ones do. So that's a good sign. And the cemetery hasn't been changed too much. There's no modern section interrupted into an old section to tempt the superintendent to start changing the orientation of gravestones around. So the modern is towards the back. Even the 1850s to 1900 section is is blended in and then on the other side of the road. So it's okay, but the footstones are gone.
And what are some of the more interesting gravestones?
All right, look for the table gravestones, of course. Look for the inscription panel gravestone flat. It's called a ledger stone. Also, there's a beautiful one inscribed into slate that is for Hannah Howe, the wife of Samuel Howe, and she died in 1816 at the age of 94 years old. All right, and then there's a beautiful limestone one that I like very much for Lucretia Ann, the daughter of Simeon and Bertha Bard. She died in 1814. All right, then a few of the family plots are very nice. They're tied off, are made separate by metal railings and stone walls. And also check out the pine tree, which has, by intention, a lot of old tablet gravestones that fell to the ground. The superintendent or his assistants have put the headstones bleeding against the pine tree. What happens if you leave them long enough is that you get pine sap all over them. And before you repair them, you have to get the sap off.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your source and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you for tuning in.